Welcome to Trinidad and Tobago to our News 4 report, a product of the Government Information Services Limited and the Ministry of Communications. I'm Nicola Barreto. Let's take a look at the headlines. Students of St. James Secondary, the first recipients of this year's laptop distribution. Finance Minister addresses post-budget questions hosted by the Women's Institute for Alternative Development. And the Minister of Sport to seek legal advice on NAAA. Thank you for joining us. Students of the St. James Secondary School were the first recipients of this year's laptop distribution as the government continues this mass annual exercise.
The Ministry of Education launched its 2013 laptop distribution to the nation's Form 1 students at the St. James Secondary School on Thursday. This is the fourth such distribution of computers to students under the current administration since the eConnect and Learn program began in 2010. On hand was Prime Minister, the Honourable Kamla Persad-Misesa, who spoke of the origins of the program, which is geared toward raising the standard of living in Trinidad and Tobago.
This program can at the same time improve our education system and socio-economic status. The program is holistic. It is aimed at providing technology to families through the expansion of internet services, because we know that handing a child a computer is only the beginning, the starting point. It is a tool that would undoubtedly be shared with the family, so that through this valuable resource, the child is educating the parent, and so we are educating our communities.
The Honourable Prime Minister revealed that at the end of September, when this year's distribution is completed, a total of 68,850 students and 4,000 teachers and other relevant staff would have benefited from the program. The principal at the school expressed his pleasure at the decision to launch this year's rollout at the school and spoke of the benefits that were being accrued.
It is indeed a pleasure to welcome the Prime Minister and the Minister of Education at St. James Secondary, especially at this fourth rollout of the laptop initiative. As we indicated, the initiative is bearing fruit. We've seen the students making positive impact in their performance and in their attitudes to work.
Prime Minister Kamla Persad-Misesa called on the students to take full advantage of the laptops and the opportunities which the government is providing.
I feel very happy about receiving the laptops. I feel very happy to meet the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago and meet the Minister of Education, and I'll do many things with the laptop.
Well, I feel excited of the laptop because we could actually use the laptop to study our work even in the night time, and we could always recharge it to use it in school. And I'm very excited to meet the Prime Minister and the Ministry of Education too.
Nikolai Edwards, News 4.
With this year's budget package pinned at an expected revenue growth at $80 per barrel, Energy Minister the Honourable Kevin Ramnarine says this figure positions the nation's economy at a sound place for its expected growth. He gave an explanation exclusive to News 4 with regards to this, as well as the incentives offered to investors in the energy sector outlined in this year's budget.
I propose that the unused tax credits be allowed to be carried forward for 1 year.
Finance Minister announcing critical measures targeting the energy sector, aimed at putting it forward at a global front in its bid to attract further investors. In opening the 2013-2014 fiscal presentation, the Minister highlighted recent activities in the upstream and downstream energy sector as reasons to improve the current fiscal regime and its governing laws to ensure its sustenance in the competitive world. Proof was noted when the success of last year's deepwater bid round resulted in BHP Billiton signing production sharing contracts. According to the Finance Minister, such are an indication of the foreign direct investment programs. This year's budget estimated revenue was pinned at an oil price of $80 per barrel. Minister Hawa says changes to the current tax regime will redound to attracting more investors.
I propose to grant an allowance of 50% in the first year of the expenditure, an allowance of 30% in the second year of the expenditure, an allowance of 20% in the third year. This will be applicable to both plant and machinery and the drilling of wells or intangible expenses. For workovers and qualifying sidetracks, I propose to allow 100% of the total cost of workovers and qualifying sidetracks in the year incurred. This will have an impact of attracting investment in already producing but idle wells. Gas compression facilities. I propose that with respect to the midstream natural gas sector, where deliverability is a key concern, the wear and tear allowance for compression facilities be increased from 25% to 33.33% under the relevant legislation.
Energy Minister Kevin Ramnarayan, speaking to News 4 following the presentation of the budget, described the tax proposals as a tremendous move forward away from the dependence on oil and gas.
You have to remember that we compete, of course, for capital with West Africa, with Brazil, with Colombia, with other countries in the world. And therefore, we have to always be attractive to investors. We've had $2.5 billion in US in foreign direct investment in 2000 and 2012. The majority of which, some $2 billion of which has gone into the energy sector in 2012. Quite a lot of that money went into BP's investment in exploration and production. And to a lesser extent, Petrotrin themselves have been investing heavily in Trinmar. So we thought we would look at the capital allowances, the structure of the capital allowances, and we've restructured those for both exploration and for development. What that simply does is it allows the companies to recover their investment faster. It affects the net present value of the investment decision, and that, of course, makes the economics more attractive for the companies.
In explaining this move in the lower house, Minister Hawaii says these tax changes will allow capital allowances to foreign energy-based companies here in Trinidad, while providing the proper legislative framework for operations to continue.
I propose to grant an allowance of 50% in the first year of the expenditure, an allowance of 30% in the second year of the expenditure, an allowance of 20% in the third year. This will be applicable to both plant and machinery and the drilling of wells or intangible expenses. For workovers and qualifying sidetracks, I propose to allow 100% of the total cost of workovers and qualifying sidetracks in the year incurred. This will have an impact of attracting investment in already producing but idle wells. Gas compression facilities. I propose that with respect to the midstream natural gas sector.
And while this year's budget has been pinned against this $80 per barrel price, Minister Ramnarayan assured the price of oil being well over $100 within the coming new year.
When we look at the factors that determine the formation of international oil price, one being supply and demand, the other one being geopolitical risk, and the third one being market sentiment, they all indicate that the price would stay well within the range of, I would think, $95 to $115 per barrel for the next 12 months. So I think $80 is a very safe assumption on which the minister has predicated his forecast of revenue.
Kimberly Calawan, News 4.
With the new minister heading the country's National Security Ministry and the second largest budgetary allocation of $6.497 billion going to security in fiscal 2014, government is confident that it will severely impact crime.
Mr. Speaker, why should a country of 1,980 square miles or 5,128 square kilometers with a population of 1.3 million spend on average $5 billion annually, and this year it's going to be higher, or 3.3% of our GDP on national security? This money could be spent on new hospitals, schools, and roads. As far as I'm aware, Trinidad and Tobago is not at war with another sovereign state. In this context, the government will continue to adopt a zero-tolerance approach to crime. Gone are the days when our young people can use the excuse that the system is working against them. To whom much is given, much is expected, and this government will ensure that our streets are safe from the scourge of violent crime. In fulfilling this mandate, the government has adopted a multidimensional approach with emphasis on operational and preventative interventions. These initiatives entail short, medium, and long-term measures. Mr. Speaker, in the coming year and beyond, the government will continue to focus on strengthening the capacity of our existing national security institutions through the introduction of modern technology, upgrading physical infrastructure, strengthening its human resource base, and expanding the legal framework.
Minister of National Security, the Honourable Captain Gary Griffith, believes the most recent approach to crime by the government will be the answer to the social ill. He says the items to be implemented, as listed by Minister Hawaii, will go a long way in the fight against crime.
Well, it certainly was not a wild shopping spree. We did a lot of research to ensure that the policies that we required, the actual assets would be provided to the law enforcement agencies. For the law enforcement agencies to be successful, they have to get the tools that are required, and this is what we intend to do. The protective services, as soon as they have the mechanisms, that the training, the tools, the logistics support, they would be able to be more successful in their operations, and that is what we are doing.
The Honourable Minister, who was recently appointed, is already demonstrating a no-nonsense approach to the high crime rate in this country and has given the commitment that the government will take back the streets.
I think I've seen for too long the gangs actually have the perception that they own the streets, they own certain areas, they have an area of responsibility, they own turf. That is no longer going to happen. We are going to take the streets back from these gangs. They no longer have any authority to feel that they are in demand and they control certain areas. And with the tools that will be provided to the law enforcement agencies, we will ensure that we would defeat them. If they want to fight, they're going to get it.
Nikolai Edwards, News 4.
Government is continuing to uphold education and training as priority areas for national development. As such, a substantial budget allocation has once again been geared towards preparing today's nationals for tomorrow's leadership requirements.
Mr. Speaker, this administration has been promoting education as the main agenda of our country. It is one of the fundamental pillars of our economic development. We are convinced that investment in knowledge, information and human capital development is a prerequisite for the prosperity and well-being of our citizens.
Education and training received a total of $9.82 billion in the 2014 budget, which is to be shared between the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Tertiary Education and Skills Training. The figure represents the largest allocation of the $61.3 billion budget to any single sector.
So it's in keeping with the Prime Minister's commitment in her manifesto pledge that she will support education in terms of people-centered development and human capital development for sustainable development. I feel very pleased and privileged to have been part with Minister Karim to move the education process forward as we continue to ensure that the changes that we are making now in education will continue to redound to the benefit of the nation. The effects of that might not be immediately, but it will be in the medium term to long term.
Minister Gopi Singh acknowledged the many developments that have taken place in the education sector over the past 3 years. He also spoke highly of the improvements in the SEA, CSEC and CAPE examinations.
We are very pleased, and I consider myself very honored to lead the education process up to the level of post-secondary. And I want to thank all the teachers and the principals and the school supervisors and the Ministry of Education officials, together with parents and of course the students, for taking up the challenges in their own education. And we're delighted to be leading that change that is sorely needed in society, education being one of the fundamental pillars of any civilized society.
During the budget presentation, Minister Hawaii noted that in the Ministry of Tertiary Education and Skills Training, the focus was on facilitating the transformation of the economy towards technology and innovation, with programs and activities centered on knowledge and creativity. Nikolai Edwards, News 4.
Sport is up next. Stay with us. The exoneration of Simoy Hackett by the National Association of Athletics administrations following positive drug tests cleared the athlete to participate at the World Championship. The sprinter was subsequently withdrawn from the prestigious contest, which left a lot of questions for the NAAA to answer. The Ministry of Sport was seeking some of those answers, but the queries only grew following a meeting between the two parties. Wayne Cunningham has more.
At the heart of the tourney issue of Simoy Hackett's selection to the World Championship team is a letter from the world governing body, the IAAF, to the local N3As. The Honourable Minister, Anil Roberts, explains.
After many attempts, the N3As presented themselves for a meeting with the ministry, officials, and myself, at which time you recall that we requested a letter from the IAAF in which Mr. Commission, the chairman of the disciplinary panel, said that the IAAF had recommended that Seymour Hackett be allowed to run. In the meeting, at the end of the meeting, after heavy grilling from the permanent secretary, Mr. Ashwin Creed, Mr. Commission admitted that the last sentence in the letter stated that the IAAF strongly recommends that Seymour Hackett choose not to run or not be allowed. We have not seen the letter, but words to the effect that she should not run the World Championships.
The said letter is alleged to be in the possession of the chairman of the N3A's disciplinary panel, Mr. George Commission.
Mr. Commission told me that he had the letter in his car and would provide it. He bumped his starter and left. He did not provide it. He has not provided it. And today I am sorry that we cannot continue to discuss the issue because the N3As, for some inexplicable reason, wrote to a member of the IAAF medical arm, not the legal arm, but the medical arm, stating that the minister, and I will quote the letter for you shortly, that the minister is interested in information, should they provide the information. And the IAAF said, do not provide any information to the minister because it is sub judice. Why is the N3As trying to hide this letter? Why are they purporting to ensure that the population does not find out what exactly happened?
In order to avoid the perception of government interference, which will result in sanctions on our athletes, the minister will take the following action.
I shall not interpret, but I shall get legal counsel, and I shall, as soon as possible, call the media to let them know exactly what is going on. Because this is not a case of the N3As and their reputation. This is not a case of the Minister of Sport. It has nothing to do with individuals. This is a case that individuals in the N3As took decisions with full knowledge of the possibility of a risk to the embarrassment of the reputation of Trinidad and Tobago at international level, now, future, and past performances.
Minister Roberts will do all in his power to avoid sanctions from the IAAF, going as far to desist from further inquiry.
If the N3As would like to protect their job so much that they want to get the IAAF to tell the minister and the ministry they're interfering, no problem. We humbly apologize and we cease to ask any questions whatsoever. We will write to the IAAF and say we will not interfere in any way. We will not ask any questions. We will not do anything to impact on our athletes performing at any level, whether it is CARIFTA level, any IAAF sanction. So, of course, if they would like to go that is fantastic. But then they will have a very big problem down here. They will have to deal with their membership and the General Council and all the clubs across Trinidad and Tobago and explain to them why they are jeopardizing the reputation and ability of all athletes to try and protect themselves from having made an irresponsible, uneducated, uninformed decision to allow a cheater to run.
Wayne Cunningham, News 4 Sports.
News 4 continues after the break. Stay with us. Minister of Finance and the Economy, Senator the Honourable Larry Hawai, says there are plans to facilitate the transitioning of persons from CPEP into the private sector. He announces this as he speaks at a post-budget forum hosted by the Women's Institute for Alternative Development.
Minister Hawaii says a portion of the 2013-2014 fiscal package will be allocated towards the development of CPEP employees. He says this decision comes after a recent attempt at transitioning CPEP employees into the private sector proved ineffective due to a lack of necessary job skills. The minister explains almost 1,500 CPEP workers recently partook in a job fair and approximately only 4% were in a position to be transitioned to the private sector. He adds that everything possible must be done to remedy this situation, as CPEP employees ought to have the ability to transition into the private sector after 3 years in the program.
To reallocate parts of the budget to some measure of retraining and reskilling in order to ensure that persons coming out of the program could be made meaningful participants in the productive sector of the society as a whole. So this year, the approach would be to try and see to what extent we can do that, and to what extent we can perhaps be successful this time around in creating the capability for persons to become meaningful participants in the productive segment of the society.
Meanwhile, addressing the women gathered, Minister Hawaii says he intends to continue placing focus on a gender-responsive budget.
There was a major departure this year in the budget speech, in that there was a small section on gender-responsive budgeting. And it's the first time such a change has found its way into any budget speech in the last 50 years. And it found its way in because I happened to be here, not in this physical place, but at Wynnard's last session a year ago. And coming out of the debate and the discussion, it was clear that there were some things that we needed to do differently. And we did start the process during the course of this year of looking at this whole issue of gender-responsive budgeting. And I'm hopeful that we can start building some of the capacity that we need. I think it's important that we started off on the journey, and you've helped us to identify an area, a place where we were clearly weak and clearly deficient. And I'm hopeful that we can continue to build on this success going forward.
Minister Hawaii is expected to partake in several post-budget forums in the coming weeks with various stakeholders. Gregory McBurney, News 4.
Over the past year, the government has been making steady progress with initiatives in the tourism sector. They have been promoting the country not only as a place to do business, but also as a premier leisure destination. In the 2013-2014 budget, the government is focusing on two main priorities: developing the airlift and enhancing room stock.
We are collaborating with the major airlines as well as with airport and cargo operators with a view to expanding their opportunities for increasing direct travel and air cargo to Trinidad and Tobago. From July 2014, JetBlue, a low-cost American-based airline, will commence flights to Trinidad, and a new charter, Apollo Airlines, a Greece-based company, will soon launch flights from selected cities in Europe to Tobago.
From July 2014, JetBlue, a low-cost American-based airline, will commence flights to Trinidad, and a new charter, Apollo Airlines, a Greece-based company, will soon launch flights from selected cities in Europe to Tobago. These new airline arrangements will complement WestJet's current service between Toronto and Port of Spain, and Caribbean Airlines operations between Port of Spain and destinations in North America and Europe.
The country's room stock is being expanded to accommodate the growth in business travelers in Trinidad and Tobago. The soon-to-be-opened Radisson luxury apartments in Port of Spain will add another 100 rooms, providing more home-like amenities. The cruise industry is being expanded. The Southern Caribbean Cruise Initiative is now at an advanced stage of conceptualization with visits to 5 destinations: Trinidad, Tobago, St. Lucia, St. Vincent, and Grenada.
The intention is to make Trinidad and Tobago the home port for cruise ships in the Southern Caribbean. The government has identified the year 2018 to transition Trinidad and Tobago to the top 30 countries out of 148 in the Global Competitive Index prepared by the World Economic Forum. The Global Competitiveness Index is the internationally well-established mechanism to assess the competitiveness of the countries in the basket.
We are marketing these objectives to signal to the world our readiness as a technologically sound and viable environment for attracting foreign direct investment. We are collaborating with the World Bank Group to fashion supply-side and demand-side initiatives to build an e-ready society.
This is to increase the availability and affordability of technologies, to expand the accessibility of telecommunications and broadband networks, and to improve government efficiency in its delivery service. Nikolai Edwards, News 4.
Well, that's how we wrap up this edition of our News 4 report, a product of the Government Information Services Limited and the Ministry of Communications. I'm Nicola Barito. Thank you for joining us.